Hallo Freunde und willkommen zu .NET API Review. Diese ist possibly die letzte .NET API Review pro diese Jahr. I don't know. I'm sure my grammar on that was terrible, and I didn't know some vocab words. So, it's 11-ish in Redmond, and so we're doing a half session of .NET API Review. And for those who don't speak bad German, it's probably our last one for the year, though the email will confirm that at some point, probably by just erasing everything in the calendar. So, we have 4 things, one of which is not an analyzer, so we'll start with the not an analyzer. So, Directory.Info and Directory.Copy 609003. Carlos?
Yeah, I think David wanted to talk about this one.
Hey, yeah, sure. So basically, it's adding copy, which is not easy to do today. I mean, by easy, I mean that you need to enumerate every file if you want to do a copy operation of the whole contents of a directory. So this is like a convenience method. So just do it in one pass. Also, it defers the work to .NET, which is obviously gonna be better than any other. Should be the best option rather than any custom implementation out of Stack Overflow, I guess. So the basic proposal has the 3 methods, the 3 signatures in directory info, but I think we should also consider adding the same methods for the static type, which are directory. I think that's pretty much to say about it. I don't know if you have questions.
My question is, so I think we had this discussed at some point in general, like I think the only concern we had was what's the behavior going to be if there's an error in the middle. And I think the only sensible answer is, well, we throw an exception and then it's whatever state the drive is in at that point, right? There's no cleanup, there's no we uncopy the files you copied.
Yeah, I don't know how you could roll back the operation.
Yeah, I mean, probably just being in whatever broken state you're in when it happens.
Yeah, like we don't try to roll back changes to files if a write fails mid-operation.
Exactly.
I'm thinking of, the UI experience that people have when they're doing, directory or file copies across different operating systems. And I wonder if people might expect this operation to be cancelable.
That's an interesting one. I mean,
sorry. Do you mean by cancelable, like passing a cancellation token?
Something like that, yeah. Like if I'm writing a UI-based application, for instance, and I'm copying files between directory A and directory B, like I'm probably going to display a progress dialog with a cancel button. And if I'm calling this API, like I have no ability to cancel the operation.
Yeah. I know there is another proposal that is about addressing cancellation support for I think it was move or file.copy. So maybe that one should tackle cancellation rather than this issue. I don't know.
Well, I don't think we should add this one without cancellation.
Okay.
Even though we already have a move that cannot be canceled?
Move, if you're on the same file system, is atomic. You just do it. It takes, less than a millisecond, so 0 time. If you do move and it goes to a different volume, then it does have to copy, and we really should have it be cancelable. But we shouldn't just dig ourselves deeper with non-cancelability.
Yeah, again, I'm just thinking of, I'm writing a UI-based application. What capabilities do I want to expose to my own user? And every file manager I've ever seen has a concept of cancellation, for instance, mid-operation. And what this is telling me is file managers can't use this API.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things we should probably separate here. One of them is, do we like this idea of copy in general? And then the second one is, what other improvements could we make, right? Because I mean, cancellation and async are both things that none of the existing directory and Directory.Info APIs have. And we also have, recursive delete. There's also no cancel. So I think if you want to make this actionable, I would suggest we just have 3 different issues for this kind of thing, and then maybe somebody can do the follow-up for should we add cancellation token, and then also should we have async versions of those.
Well, but adding cancellation token here, so like we have the 3 overloads here, and I was already going to say we should collapse these 2 into defaulted parameters.
Right.
But like all we have to do is just add a cancellation token to it.
I think that one I'm fine. It would just seem weird to have like copy async, for example, if nothing else is async.
Doesn't need to be async.
Yeah, it would be fully synchronous.
Consider adding a cancellation token in long running or blocking synchronous methods. And you didn't see that. I didn't distribute. I shared a page.
You might get a DMCA takedown notice now.
But yeah, so I think that we can leave the simple string one, and then or following you have a lot of defaulted parameters, and then default recursive overwrite and cancellation token.
And the default would be false default, right?
I assume.
What exactly does recursive mean?
It copies everything that is a subdirectory, right?
Yeah, like jumping into the files within a directory of the directory that you've started.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if...
So by default, it's only going to copy the files in this directory? That doesn't seem like what Windows Explorer copy and paste on a directory does, right?
Correct.
Doesn't
True,
seem
but
like the
it's-
right behavior.
Well, it is though what basically every shell-based copy command does. None of them are recursive by default.
So I left a comment.
Does any shell-based copy folders by default without the recursive flag? I guess
That's
it's
very simple.
completely empty.
I mean,
That's my point.
robocopy.
Yeah, I don't think CP does in PowerShell, and I'm pretty sure in Bash it doesn't either.
So then it kind of is a moot argument, right? Like if it doesn't do directory copy, and this is called Directory.Copy, then you can't compare the two because that's not what it does.
No, I'm saying
That's-
if you say CP with a directory name, by default it will only copy the contents of the directory, but not subdirectories.
I think it's worse than that, and that's the point I'm trying to make. I think it will only copy the empty directory, and if it has any contents whatsoever, it will complain and be like, if I'm recalling correctly.
So you're basically saying
Obviously-
unless you specify recursive, it won't even take the files. It will just create an empty directory.
It will just copy an empty directory and it will complain for anything else. I can test this right now, but that's my recollection.
No, I
Obviously, I
think
use
you're right. I don't think it
the dash bar
complains.
flag.
I think it will just immediately succeed, and then you're wondering whether the directory is empty. I think I had that a few times.
Yeah, that's exactly what it does. CP and PowerShell, at least, just copies the directory with nothing in it.
Right.
Well,
so
that's
the problem
not
with the shell copy command is it supports both files and directory. So it's like a little weird. I think since this only supports directories, defaulting to recursive might make more sense. It's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, we could also go all the way and just have an enum, but I mean that seems a bit over the top. Because I mean, does anybody ever want the behavior that CP has on PowerShell? Because that's basically make here. That's
The
basically
only
what it
thing
is.
in enum really gets you is, you now have two bool parameters, one after another. And unless you're using named parameters, like you might get confused as to what's what.
I meant for recursive, like non-recursive, directory only,
Oh, I see.
directory with files and subdirectories, or something like that. But I think, like, to me, the behavior that CP has is just not useful. Like, because that's basically just a glorified make dir at that point. So you might as well say, if you don't specify recursive, you get the files, but you don't get subdirectories. If you want subdirectories, you have to say recursive true, and then at least then it's somewhat sensible.
Sure.
On Ubuntu, CP says -r not specified, omitting the directory you said, right?
So it does nothing, basically.
It basically forces you to put -r.
Well,
I see.
I mean, like,
if you want to actually copy something.
because the structure of that command is copy source 1 through n to destination being whatever the last parameter is. And so it's, if you had like 10 things and one of them's a directory, it's going to say you didn't say recursive. I don't know what to do about that. So then it ignores the source.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like anybody who would ever call this API is going to want recursive. So I would actually suggest recursive be true by default. And that if somebody does want, no, really, I just wanted, directory /star, then do that. It's also, so there is also an ambiguity here in what overwrite existing files false means. I guess
Like,
it's
as in
don't overwrite
fail
them,
or
but
don't overwrite them.
if we again think of this as like what would Explorer do, it would be, if you see an existing file, basically give a callback for what to do with it. We don't have to go that far here. It's just, I completely agree that we should have the cancellation token, because this could take a very, very, very long time if you've passed recursive and you basically copy your entire drive. I don't know that we need to care about, do you wish to overwrite this one or not? But
I mean, Carlos is asking a related question, right? What should happen when you have a file that you don't have permissions for? Should we skip or stop? Basically throw. I mean, if we look at the common scenarios where I would use this API, I mean, I wouldn't use this API to implement Norton Commander or Explorer, right? I would probably need more control than that, because I would probably also would like a progress bar and a bunch of other stuff, right? So at that point, you're probably better off just writing the whatever 30 lines of code that it would be to do it manually, and then you have the control that you want for your UI. But in my own scripting, if I don't have permissions or something, I will probably skip and keep going. And for override existing files, either keep them as they are or override them, and then that's the end of it. So I think what's proposed here is probably the right shape for most people. And I think if people don't like it, well, you can always recurse by hand and get the exact behavior you want, right? So we don't have to provide every single thing that is humanly possible, right?
yeah, I mean, I wonder if no permission to read would be basically a hold on to this exception, do all the rest of the work that you can do. If nothing else caused you to throw because like a write failed in the middle, then like throw this exception. Just let someone know it didn't go smoothly, but do as much work as you can. That may be a bad idea.
Well,
Oh man,
at that
aggregate
point,
exception.
I was just gonna go
Yeah.
with throw the first one, but
yeah. But then what do you do with that, like, information after the fact?
You say, oh crap, my destination is incomplete.
yeah, like it's,
Now I need to restart the operation.
alternatively we could make this, instead of void, make it bool of, was I capable of copying everything, or was there something I couldn't read or walk into?
So now you're considering continue or fail on read error as another pivot. So
Yeah, I mean, like it's
Yeah.
yeah. So this is really the problem with the simple sounding API is it's baking in a whole lot of policy.
Which is why I would
and
say, like,
which
for
is
the
fine.
scenarios, yeah, for the scenarios that I would care about is I wouldn't care about the errors at all. I would just say we do our best, and then, you know, we would only throw if we can't write the file.
Right, but if you did something like write a bunch of stuff to a temporary location, then you called for some reason you instead of using directory.move, you use directory.copy to say now go copy it to where it should go. 3 files failed to be read and therefore failed to be copied, and now you say source directory.delete. Like you've just lost data. Your program says everything went fine, but you lost
That's
data.
fine. That's a fair point.
So that's where, to me, if you can't read something, that needs to be reported either via a return value or a delayed exception or an immediate exception. But we should not get to the end of this operation and say everything went hunky dory if it didn't faithfully replicate the directory.
I buy that.
I wonder if we could explore the option of adding an argument for enumeration options. There's a property like ignore inaccessible, which will avoid throwing exception and stopping the operation if we encounter a file we don't have access to read. I'm just not sure if the rest of the properties would apply for the copy operation. I think David wants
No,
to
it
talk.
doesn't really, because I mean this is literally just for the fast enumeration, right? I think if we want to go down that path, I think we should probably have a dedicated type for this API.
A distinct enum that is copy behaviors.
Well, or literally a struct or a class with properties, right?
Right.
Could
Well,
we
go ahead,
could we have a delegate in order to decide how to proceed after certain errors? Similar, I think what you mentioned at the beginning, Jeremy. But we could add that as a separate API that we shouldn't need to log on, and maybe based on usability feedback.
Yeah, I mean, creating a separate options type, I'll just be generic and say type, does mean that any of these things could be added later to the same API or to the same copy function, right? It's the okay, great. We added the what do you can now specify a handler for we see an existing file. Since you have a handler,
Yeah.
we're not going to pay attention to the boolean, and other things like that. So you could grow the option struct, which Alex and Alexander in YouTube chat were proposing very similar things. So yes, I see your comments, guys.
I mean, I'm personally of the opinion, like, I think if you want that level of control, you enumerate yourself.
Sure.
Because I mean, it's not like 1,000 lines of code, right? I think to me this is a convenience API, so we should optimize for the case that makes sense. I completely buy the argument that not telling the user that we didn't copy everything is probably a bad idea because then you have data loss potentially. So I think changing the API to return a bool makes sense. And then I would just leave it at that and then say, well, if you want more control, then by all means, but then you walk yourself because, there's what happens if you can't read? What happens if you can't write? What happens if, you can't read for certain reasons? Or what happens when you run out of this space? Or what happens this? And then if you want to control all of this and have progress and, have a callback where you make different decisions based on different files, then at that point, you're probably better off just writing the 20 lines of code that this actually constitutes and then apply the knobs you want, right?
All right, so do we just think Boolean for the there was something I couldn't read case?
But we still throw exceptions when other things happen, right?
Yeah.
It's not like a try thing,
No, because try to me implies that if we return false, we shouldn't have done anything. Like I think the try pattern is bad if it has side effects that you have to clean up yourself.
Maybe a different way of asking is, when we document this, we say, if this returns false, why does this return false? Do we explicitly say because we couldn't read a certain file, or do we explicitly say something bad, like we weren't able to fulfill the whole copy?
Yeah, I would say false means we didn't copy everything because we couldn't read certain things. But I would say if you run out of disk space, we would throw.
Yep.
Or if you don't have permissions to write the file to the destination, would also throw.
Yeah, I think basically it'd be if file.open throws or directory.enumerate throws, because you hit a subdirectory that you didn't have permissions for. Those would change the return condition to false. So there's something I couldn't even try to copy. If I started trying to copy and it failed, now it's throw. So no space on device, access denied on write, your destination drive got unplugged in the middle of the copy. Any of those things are going to be a throw.
So it's basically we couldn't read something.
Yeah, couldn't read something.
But it's basically I think the class is more like, does on error resume next make sense? Like if you run out of disk space, on error resume next makes no sense because you're out of disk space. So trying the next file is not going to change that, right? Versus you can't read something, well, you may be able to read the next one.
And overwrite existing files false
Means you just skip those.
And
Maybe
does
we
it
should
return
rename it
true
to-
or false?
It would return still true because we copied everything we could while fulfilling the contract that you specified, right?
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. A file of the same name already existed. I'm not going to even try reading the source.
Maybe we should rename it to skip existing files though, because if you say override false, do you want it to fail or do you want it to skip?
Yeah. I would expect failure, not skip.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that was a half-articulated thought I had earlier, but that's a much clearer presentation. So if the intent is skip, we should rename it to skip.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, and just to, I see a lot of chatter in YouTube chat as well. Like one of the things that we've been discussing in the back channel here is like this API is not intended to give you, absolutely full control of everything. And I think Amo articulated this point earlier as well. Like if we can make an API that is sufficient for, the 95% use case because we give you maybe one or two knobs, and you have your own scenario falls into the 5% use case because you have some more complex policy that you need implemented, like this API is not for you. And I don't think it's worth our time as, the .NET framework to try creating such a can be used by everybody API, because like there's a reason that the ecosystem has, hundreds of file copy tools. Like they all do different things because people have different needs. Like there's no way on this earth for us to, do something that's universally applicable to everybody.
Yeah.
At least not in such a way that we can also do the rest of the stuff we want to do for .NET 7.
Yeah.
Why have two overloads, Jeremy? Why not just have the...
Because if you have two or more defaulted parameters, you should have an overload that doesn't have any defaults so that people who don't understand square brackets and IntelliSense don't cry.
It's a very succinct way of putting it.
Except I think we said we liked true better for recursive.
The only thing is I don't like the first parameter names. We should probably spell out the word source and destination, and probably I would probably replace directory name with path, because that's how we call it on delete.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna
For
say
move has source spelled all the way out, and then dir name, and then dest dir name.
Probably nobody saw the parameters in the API review when they did that. I mean, in fairness, BCL parameter names are often a gamble.
All right, so we want that did not do what I wanted it to do.
Oh, because you need to do something like Control Shift Alt L or some bullshit like that. I don't know.
Ah, okay. So it's Alt Shift in VS and Alt Control, or sorry, Alt Shift in VS and Control Alt Shift in VS Code. All right, so we want destination path.
I think that's what I would call it, yeah. At least it's reasonably short.
So source path and destination path.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I prefer path rather than name.
Yep, that makes sense to me.
And obviously they can be relative paths, right? Relative or full, both work, right?
Yes.
Yep. For the users of current directory, that would still work, thanks to Windows.
Okay. And so we do believe recursive true should be the default because that's probably what people want with the simple API. Feel like I said that, someone agreed, but before I write it down, I'd like someone to agree or disagree.
I would expect the default overload to use the same value for the Boolean parameters, right? For the other overload, if you have true for recursive, that would have to be the default for the parameter for the overload with just one parameter.
Yeah, sorry. The simple version will do whatever we say the defaults are going to do. The question is, do we agree that the default for recursive should be true?
I honestly would say, so first let's agree on what false would mean. To me, false means you copy the files, not the subdirectories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the top directory.
Yeah. I would probably match the existing other APIs we have that take recursive, which I think is false.
I mean, delete, right? Directory.delete by default only deletes an empty directory.
Right.
And throws if it's not empty.
Right. I wouldn't match that behavior, yeah.
Well, but then but copy with recursive all should match that behavior as well then, which is only copy the empty directory.
Yeah, right? See, that's I think the only thing I would differ, because to me that's just not useful.
But I don't think it's useful to just copy the top level files. Like I think by default, if you say directory copy, it should copy the whole directory.
Yeah, like I feel that somebody who wants to do a directory copy, they want basically Explorer, Control-C, Control-V. Like that's what 99% of the callers are going to want. And then
I would argue that directory.delete is dumb. It has a dumb default. If I say directory.delete, I don't care if it's stuff in it. Delete the directory, please.
I mean, it's doing, that one has a sensible, it's doing the same thing as rmdir. It's rmdir directory, it's like fail, you still have something inside, and you're like rmdir/f, and it's like okie dokie.
I mean, I would argue
again, that's a invalid argument, because when we're talking about copy, we're saying, well, we shouldn't do what CP does.
It is very much an explicit thing that deletion recursively is an explicit action, because otherwise people do things like accidentally pass in the root directory and fuck their system. You never want to delete recursively by default. It must be an explicit opt-in.
Yeah. Copy is I guess we renamed the skip from override to skip, so we should talk about the default on that as well. But the copy, if it's not overwriting things by default, it's not entirely destructive, whereas delete's destructive. So I think I'm okay with copy being a little bit more friendly than delete.
I mean, we can also agree to not make it defaulted. I could argue and say like delete should have never have a no parameter overload. You would always have to specify either true or false for recursive, in which case it's pretty clear to you what the behavior is.
Okay, and
I'm going to get tripped up with copy being recursive by default because it's different from what the command line tools on Linux, Mac, and Windows do by default. It's different from what the rest of .NET, how the rest of .NET treats recursive by default. It's going to trip me up, and it's going to trip other people up. It may not be the desired behavior of a lot of people that it fails, but it's consistent with everything
it wouldn't fail
else.
Though. It would just not do what you want.
It's a legitimate bug farm, is basically what it is, right?
Both of them are potential bug farms.
That's why I would say let's maybe not make it default, so that you can't call it without specifying whether you want recursive or non-recursive behavior, because then it's really impossible for you to be surprised. So I said recursive false, and it wasn't recursive. It's like, yeah, you said that. So
so copy that to the simple overload.
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems to me like, same with delete, really. When are you ever saying delete, but I don't care? It's not a thing, right?
I don't know. RMRF is one of my most common commands on a Linux system. Okay, so skip existing files.
Notably, RMRF is such an issue of people accidentally deleting important files that RMRF in recent builds of Linux, in recent years, a number of years, will actually make you pass in an additional parameter if it detects you're trying to delete some of the special folders at the root level. They added extra error handling to catch this case because of how common it is.
Yeah.
And if we do the same, we're going to end up in the same scenario of now we have to add extra handling to try and detect, are you on a root drive?
So, for skipping files, you can make a case that either decision might result in data loss. So I think thing is.
Yeah, you beat me to it.
So don't default that parameter either?
Oh.
Yeah, that seems a bit over the top maybe, but...
If you said either decision can result in data loss.
Yeah,
but I think one is more likely than the other.
I think the things that I normally consider when I'm doing things like robocopy are, do I want to replace existing files? And do I want to mirror the contents? Meaning, do I want to delete any files that exist in the source or in the destination, but not the source? Those are the two main things that I consider for whenever I'm doing a robocopy. Either I don't want to replace anything existing, or I do want to replace and I want to mirror so that it's identical.
I don't know, I just use /e.
Yeah, which I think does that. I think that mirror is E and purge.
Yeah, it doesn't. I don't do purge. Purge is scary.
Yeah, purge.
Too many times I've been pointing at the wrong directory because I have an off by one error with what it thinks the destination should be. So. YouTube's catching all my typos. Yes, and these should be copied too because move on directory.info is move too.
Right.
Yeah, so when it was overwrite existing files, I think the default was false. I renamed overwrite to skip. So presumably we want to say skip existing is true. Because skip had a clearer meaning, but it has the inverse meaning.
Yes, because you switched it, it should have a true value by default. I agree.
I think that makes sense to me. Yeah. Yeah, I think it could live with that API. It would do what I would do most of the time.
Any objections? Sold.
As a note to the engineering team, I wrote in chat so as not to interrupt the conversation here, some edge cases that might be interesting to test for. Just, it would be interesting for us to document those too, so that we don't have weird undefined behavior across platforms.
You're not happy with UB in .NET?
UB is I guess if we're trying to make .NET more low level like C, then yeah, undefined behavior is a thing that we should embrace, right?
Oh yeah.
All right.
You may not get the behavior you want, but you will get the behavior you deserve.
Thank you.
You say that now until you start writing the code for this API.
Yeah, you have a huge test matrix ahead of you. We don't. So, thank you.
All right. So we have 20 minutes left. Do we have
We can go in order.
any opinion?
Okay. Can just go in order. Hopefully we get to them all.
Yeah. I mean, this group has lots of opinions, some of which are even well-formed.
All right. So replace occurrences of TypeInfo with type and get TypeInfo with get type 61122. Basically undo .NET Core 1.
Yes.
Seems
I worked on that feature.
reasonable.
You should undo it.
Yeah, I think we've already been doing this throughout our libraries already, haven't we?
Yeah, but I think this is add an analyzer that says you talked about TypeInfo. Just go back to talking about type.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is I think we fleshed out that it is appropriate for people to do this because we've already been doing it within our own code. So the analyzer can help with that.
Is there any reason why we can't have a fixer for that?
Sorry, go ahead, Boya.
Yeah, so there is a proposal for obsoleting the TypeInfo, and but many people are supportive with that, but are worried about the huge many usage of the heavy usage of the TypeInfo, and so this one should help with replacing the TypeInfo type and its references.
Does the analyzer only kick in on certain TFMs? Like, does it only net 6.0 and greater, or net 7.0 and greater?
We should not key it off of that. We should rather key it off of whether they're effectively equivalent, which you can ask. Basically, the question is, does TypeInfo extend type?
So the root of my question is, if I'm, for whatever reason, targeting net standard 1x, and the analyzer is all of a sudden being like, you should not be.
Well, that's what I'm
using
saying.
TypeInfo
You should basically check whether you can do it, right? Can you actually replace get TypeInfo with get type? And the way you would know that is not by checking the TFN, but you would check whether TypeInfo extends type, I believe. Because I think in .NET Standard 1x, TypeInfo does not extend type. What's the other way around? I mean, there's some hierarchy change that we can go for.
The analyzer package itself has a version of the SDK that it targets, right? Like,
Well,
can't we just have?
But it's not. but it's not that, right? So let's say you take .NET 7 SDK and you produce a library that targets .NET Standard 1.0. You can't do the change that the analyzer is telling you to do.
Right, but I thought that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I thought that in order to use the analyzer, you pulled the analyzer in as a package. And if you're targeting Net Standard 1.0, say, if the analyzer package itself doesn't target Net Standard 1.0, like the analyzer simply can't be imported into your project in the first place.
That's not correct.
Okay,
These come as
never mind.
part of the SDK.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they are
Like you-
orthogonal axes,
Okay.
right?
It executes basically with whatever VS executes with, and then it well, actually it's with Roslyn, so it's probably using core, and then
Well,
it
true.
Well, basically all analyzers have to be Net Standard 2.0 because they have to run in proc in VS and they have to be able with just .NET Framework, right? And then they also have to be run on when you compile the command line with core, which would be core.
yeah. So they all start up and they ask the targeting pack that they're accessing, like, do these types exist or do these members on these types exist? And that's when they do that when starting up, and then if they don't detect them, then they don't, or generally don't even register themselves. So it's kind of a CC tour, and then they go away. So
I think your rule makes sense, Emo. Like I did not know this about TypeInfo actually, that we changed it between 1.6 and 2.0 to
Yeah.
inherit from type.
So basically the motivation of this whole thing was to remove all the reflection APIs from type and move them to a new type called TypeInfo. And the way we did it originally was because this was just a profile of things that still have to run on .NET Framework. We did this weird thing in the implementation where the implementation hierarchy doesn't match the public surface API hierarchy. And then when we did Core 2.0, we effectively shipped the implementation hierarchy because, I mean, that's basically the only way to make both sides work. So that's why, yeah, you just have to, I forgot what the actual check is, but you basically check the hierarchy. That's the way to know
Right.
whether you can
TypeInfo. If TypeInfo inherits from type, turn this analyzer on.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Makes sense.
all right, category severity.
The only thing is, so the only thing is, it doesn't really change the thing though, right? Because whether we obsolete it with a diagnostic ID or whether we have a custom analyzer, it's the same outcome. It's still a lot of noise, right? So the real thing we want is a fixer, right?
I mean, yeah, if you're calling get type info or have a local variable of type info, it seems like we can just replace it with get type and type, and we can do that blindly. So a fixer seems mostly doable. Like, I can't think of any reason why a fixer wouldn't work. It's almost fixable by rep.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily mean that it produces code that will always compile, right? Because it can't quite do that.
Do we have anything on type info that isn't on type? Like, type info is an empty
is
extension
listed.
now, right?
No, it's the other way
It's
around,
listed
right?
above and possible replacements I have in the proposal. I didn't found only one API doesn't have direct replacement.
Yeah, I don't think that's the problem. The problem is you wrote code for .NET Standard 1.0, which means basically all your APIs that deal with reflection either take or return a type info. And now we're telling people, well, don't do type info anymore, move to type directly, right? But then you're in a method body that is supposed to return a type info, and now you change the call set from get type info to get type. Well, then the result no longer compiles because you can't assign a type to a type info. It's the other way around only, right? So that means the fixer will fix the code, but now, well, the fixer cannot change the method signature, and okay, maybe the fixer can, but then, well, now you have all the call sides that call the method and extract the type info, so that wouldn't necessarily be super trivial to do, right?
No, but those would have already been fixed if you were dealing with. You had a local that was of type info, and we rewrote it to be of type.
Yeah, but you would have to change all signatures in the middle, right? And that, there's a million reasons why that may not work, right? Oval resolution, you already have the method that takes type and does the get type info in the middle or something, right? So you can create cases where code may not compile, but I personally think that's probably okay.
There's methods on TypeInfo that aren't on type, like get declared XXX.
Well,
Right.
I think they are on the base type.
No, they're declared on TypeInfo. So like TypeInfo.getDeclared property. And the things that's special about them is that it's got a special lookup flag, binding flags. So if you're using this method, if you took in the TypeInfo and then said get declared property, and then we change that TypeInfo to a type, your code's no longer going to compile because type doesn't have get declared property on it.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I've actually changed a few of these in our code, and that's a big hindrance.
Is there
actually.
any reason we can't move those up the hierarchy? Because it seems a bit fucked that TypeInfo has more APIs than type.
I mean, we can't do that if they're
We could-
targeting net standard 2.0.
Yeah.
Well, sure, but that's a different problem. We could then say the fixer only kicks in if the members exist on type, right? But
I mean, extension methods would work too if we need to do it somehow.
true, although I'd rather probably push it down the base. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking as a crutch for down level.
Yeah, I mean, should we say that the fixer will have a few cases that it might get wrong, that it should just generally work?
I mean, this is the thing, the general attention that we have. But I mean, my opinion is that when you do refactorings, take a rename, right? A rename can totally produce code that doesn't compile anymore.
Mhm.
And that's okay, right? It's just like it gets you halfway there. And then you can either undo it if it didn't do what you wanted, or you can use that to make the other fixes. But the problem is, if you have a reflection heavy code base, then holy shit, is that a noise level. And then what I've always done is regex, which, you know, has the same problem and is more effort to get there, but it does clean up 90% of the problem.
Okay.
I mean, if we have a fixer, I'm not sure we want an analyzer, honestly.
Well, I mean, you can't have a fixer without an analyzer.
Oh, is that how that works?
The analyzer produces diagnostics. The fixer says it has a code fix available for the diagnostic that was produced.
Oh, sure, but we could obsolete it and put the diagnostic on the obsolation, no? Wouldn't that do the same thing?
If we have a unique obsolation code already on the type, or we put one on the type because we didn't already have one, then we could have a fixer that just kicks off that obsolation code, yes.
Because I don't think we have. I mean, I think get type info. I don't think is obsoleted today, right?
No.
So yeah, we could basically do that. I mean, the only real reason why analyzer might be useful is because you can do it for older frameworks, right? The problem with obsolation is you can only do it for a new framework, clearly, right? But that might be the only argument in favor of analyzers.
Well, and it can also, if we do it just if we've marked the type as obsolete, but you're using a TypeInfo specific member, like the obsolation is still going to trigger because you had a variable declared of an obsolete type. The analyzer, if we say it shouldn't flag when it sees that you called a TypeInfo specific member, then this one's a little smarter than the obsolation.
That's true.
So,
although I think if you do the changes, you should not have to use TypeInfo anywhere.
well, somewhere you'll, like, if you called whatever somebody's get declared whatever, then you'll have to now go find out what the replacement for that method is. It's because if it's it's not just rename one word. It's you have to actually go think now. Right. So, category and severity.
Info or suggestion, right? That was.
Yeah.
Oh, the
Info.
severity. That's the
Deploy
original
and
suggestion.
Maintainability or design.
Yeah.
I feel like
right.
design is about your public API, so maintainability seems more like what we're going after here.
Does it exist as a category already? If it does, then that sounds right. If it doesn't, then maybe not.
It exists.
Okay,
Severity info.
seems right.
Boom.
And that's a good example where maybe we should consider the diagnostic waves or whatever we have now, because the value of making it higher than info would be to avoid new code taking a dependency on it. It's just really annoying when you upgrade existing code. So that's an unfortunate thing.
So this analyzer was discussed originally in the Rosling analyzer repo, and it already has a PR, but we want to get it discussed and approved first. So the idea is that if you are passing an argument that inherits from another class, and you're only consuming the members of the parent class, then switch the type of the argument of the parameter to that base class, as long as you're not using stuff from the child class.
Yeah, Bishop always had that. I like that actually.
Yeah, I mean it is tricky because it is a thing that is useful until you have shipped, basically. At which point it's now great. A member moved down. Well, I don't care. I said I take a list I can't change to IEnumerable. Like that's a completely different method as far as the runtime is concerned.
Okay, so there is one restriction is to only affect methods that are not public.
Yeah, but that's not useful either.
Right, because the reason the reason it's proposed as design, and it was design in FXCop, is it's trying to help you with you're creating a brand new thing. You're taking a thing that is more specific than you need. So you took a file stream, but really you just meant any stream.
Right.
And then it's great until you get the first warning that you can't fix, and maybe you suppress that one, and now you get a couple more, and you're like, fine, just turn it off, never look at it again.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one reason why the severity was suggested as hidden, in case it could cause a breaking change. But if the user decides to turn it on, well, if there's a case where they are not supposed to change it, they can ignore it or suppress it manually, case by case.
There's also a lot of cases where it's valid and desirable to take the non-base type for devirtualization purposes.
Yeah. I don't exactly recall how it shows up in VSharper, but I think they have a visualization in the editor that kind of gives you not quite as squiggly, but basically like 3 dots or something that basically shows you there is a suggestion for this thing.
Right. I think
but it's not a warning.
I think
so
we have that
when you,
too.
When
It's
you
called
type in the code, you see it, and then after you typed it in and you close the file, it doesn't show up in the error log, right?
Yeah, I think
Which
that's called
seems to
IDE
be-
suggestion.
Yeah, I think that seems like the reasonable thing here, right? Because the only place where you care is if you literally just typed in the code, right? If you already shipped it and you open the file 3 years later, well, okay, now you have a hint there that shows up in the editor, but it's not causing any warnings, so it's not in your face, basically.
Yeah, and then
That
I don't
seems
know if the FXCop version had, like even if you have the code here that it says it would, we have the before and after with flag, but let's just say we had both of these members, right? Like if it can't squiggle file stream because like presumably you had the overload for a reason. Possibly it's that you used to take file stream, now you've made it more general and it works on any stream, and you just need to keep the member for compat. So I don't know if it looks at overloads to decide, oh, maybe you're doing something tricky here. But again, like devirtualization or API compat or whatever. Yeah, I think it's probably
so a case
fine.
that
Whatever it
should not
did.
be flagged is, sorry, if for example, FileStream is overriding the original method, it should be a case to not flag.
Well, all right. So override, it should never flag, because override means somebody else decided what the behavior here is.
Okay.
But if it's an overload, and so if you had both of these members on the same type, like, to me, you probably meant to have a file stream specific one and then a stream other one, even if it doesn't think you have anything special about file stream here. It's just like
Right.
that probably means it's API compat. You used to be file stream. You've now simplified your code to where you could take stream, but you need to keep the old method around. Don't make me suppress that. It's obvious from the usage that this is a suppressed use. Again, I don't know what it handles, so that's probably just, if it doesn't handle it, it'll probably be a thing that people give as a suggested improvement to the analyzer in the future.
Yeah, which is also why if it's not a warning, it's probably not really important to handle all the cases. But
That's true. So yeah.
But yeah, suggesting something on an override would be dumb. It's like, well, that would never work. So
Indeed. Even if you're like, well, across all implementations, people only ever use the base type. It's like, well, it's a public virtual. You don't know what the derived types that you don't see are doing with it. All right.
Ooh.
Yeah, at least I'm pretty sure that's what the API calls it, IDE suggestion, which is basically the ellipsis of the IDE will tell
Yeah,
you
it has
something's here,
multiple names.
but the log won't.
We sometimes use info, but it means the same.
Fair enough.
Okay,
right.
Thank you.
Okay, and well, there's one left. I don't really have capacity for overflow today, and I'm hosting the stream.
In that case, it's not happening. Okay.
No problem.
So, yeah. So that wraps up what at least I have time to do today, and it sounds like everybody else is going to be polite and not cut YouTube off from our process here. And so based on previous assumptions, I declare API review adjourned for the year unless Emo says otherwise later.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Happy New Year.